Okay, well, Brent, thanks for having me at the gym again. I've been here a couple times, but we were talking earlier, like every single time I come back, there's another new piece of equipment. Now we got two massive pulleys in the wall. So
yeah, big cable stacks.
Yeah. But yeah, I've been waiting. I know we've been talking for a while about getting you on, but we finally got you on. So thanks for having me here and coming on. I just kind of give the beginning of your story, starting back in Lethbridge, and just kind of give us the 101 on Brent Fikowski.
Yeah, so I'm Brent Fikowski, and I compete in CrossFit. That's my, that's my thing right now. So I guess when I was, a youth athlete, I swam competitively every summer. So I competed that was like a 3.5, 4-month season. And then in the winter, I competed in all sorts of different sports. When I was young, it was soccer, taekwondo, track and field, whatever. You can call those winter sports in Canada, I suppose. But in the summers I was swimming. And then as I got older, it was volleyball. So like middle school and high school was just volleyball, swimming. Those were, that was how my 12 months were spent. And then I got a scholarship to play volleyball at Lethbridge College. Did that for 2 years. Didn't play much, not for lack of trying, but just wasn't good enough. And then I was continuing to play volleyball, was really enjoying it. Did 2 years of schooling in Canada, and then did 2 years to finish my accounting degree in Australia.
Yeah.
And moved there with my best buddy, and we were going there, we were hoping to just play some beach volleyball, competitively, but nothing that would get us any money, but just for fun, like AAA stuff, AA. And when I got there, one of the beach volleyball guys said, you should go to this CrossFit gym, try it out. There's a good coach there. So I went there and just kind of immediately fell in love with it. It was expensive for me at the time, and so when I showed up and I knew I had the money, I budgeted it all out. And so even the first week I was there 6 days in a row, because I'm like, well, if I'm paying for this, I'm getting my money's worth. So I'm gonna come, for the full hour class 6 days a week.
Yeah.
And then after I think a month or two, no, it was longer than that, it was probably 3 months. I went to like a local competition, and I remember not really wanting to. Oh no, I did want to go, but my expectations were very low. I kind of had put these theoretical competitors on a pedestal, thinking, oh man, everyone just doesn't stop. Like they're all just freaks. And so, but I went to this competition with 50 athletes and came 5th. And so then coach and I set our sights on some bigger things. We wanted to make regionals that year, which at the time was the step before making it to the CrossFit Games, which is a big event. And so we, as soon as he kind of set that goal and said, I think you can do it, we did the open workouts from the last year. So we're kind of 6 months late for qualifying, but we just did the qualifying workouts from the year before, just to see if I had, where my fitness was at. And sure enough, I was very close. I would have been like right on the cusp of making it, with some serious holes in certain areas, and focused on those areas. And then fast forward 6 months, there were a new set of qualifying events. Did really well in those, came 7th in Australia, and then made it to the regionals there, came 6th, and the top 3 made the games. So like relatively close, but definitely a cut below those top 3. And then moved back home to Canada, and and then that was kind of like the start of me finding CrossFit. And I moved back to Canada, still finished my degree, found a full-time job in Kelowna as an accountant, and got to work, but was focusing a lot on my training.
Yeah. So what year was that? Was that 2014 when you came over to Canada?
Yeah, I guess it would have been I moved back to Canada in September of 2013.
Okay. Yeah. So that's when I would have seen you that first, because the next open that you did, you were doing that over at Okanagan, right? And you were doing it there. I remember we would all come and watch you and stuff.
Yeah, that's when I would have first met.
Yeah. And then there was one of those I remember, and I'm sure you remember this too, where I can't remember what it was. I feel like there was muscle ups in it though, but it was a workout where you beat Jason Kalipa's time.
Oh, okay.
And you were like, take that, Jason.
Oh, did I? That's embarrassing.
But so now that you kind of had that little intro of how your story began, how you got to CrossFit, just walk us through and give us some good detail, because I saw a lot of this, and in the process of your goal shifting just from regionals to really going to the games and being at the top of the games, and how you navigated a lot of those, I wouldn't say setbacks, but it just felt like you were always just this close, right, for those couple of years.
Yeah, so obviously, Australia, I had kind of achieved what I wanted to achieve in Australia. It was like, wow, I came 6th place. I've only been doing this for I guess, yeah, I'd been doing it for a year. Like, this is awesome. I'm already, beating guys that I was kind of watching on YouTube and stuff. And then next year, because I moved and I had an injury after regionals there for a bit. I had a really bad patella tendonitis in 2013. So it was really overcoming that, figuring that out. And so going into regionals 2014, first time in Canada West, I was just thinking, like, just come here, kind of like put your stamp on it, just have a solid showing. Didn't really have very high expectations. And then before I knew it, I think after day one, I was sitting in first or second. Mm-hmm. Day two, I was in first or second. And at that time, it was top two to qualified. So it's like, holy smokes, you're right on the cusp of making it. And then next morning, Sunday morning, I won the workout, the chipper workout. And then that afternoon, I was like, oh, I'm in a qualifying spot. And then I lost it because my overhead squats went to trash, which was pretty devastating, but also I kind of wasn't expecting to be that close to qualifying for the games yet. So, really within 24, 48 hours, I was just like happy about the experience. I still got a medal out of it because third place, still got a medal. I just didn't qualify. And so I was just excited about the next year. It's like, wow, even with the injury and what felt like a really kind of not a solid year of training, I still made progress relative to the field, which is what's important. And I was like, oh, sweet, this next year's going to be great. But then as that year sort of went along from May of 2014 to the next May of 2015, I kind of put more and more pressure on myself and was really focusing on, like, you got to make the games this year, you're good enough, like, you have to make the games. And I did some off-season competitions, and everything was lining up that, I probably had more or less the ability to make the games. And so I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, getting pretty stressed. And yeah, leading up to that competition was just a bit of a wreck, mentally and emotionally, because I was just putting so much internal pressure on myself. Like, this is the weekend, you can't screw it up. And you could just kind of see it if you were to watch that footage. The first workout, finished that, and I was like, just like dumping a lot of emotion, like celebrating, and it's like children. It's like one of 6 events, there's a lot of weekend left. And so there was a lot of kind of like pent up emotion there. And I think by the last day, I was just kind of out of gas. Combined with, not a great prep, like physically in some ways. And then also just, I wasn't good enough at handstand push-ups as well. I had a really bad score on a handstand push-up workout just because I wasn't good enough at them yet. And then the last workout just kind of didn't approach it with enough speed, just kind of messed it up, right?
Yeah.
And so then again, kind of same thing. I was sitting in first place most of the weekend, more or less, first or second most of the weekend, then slid down to 7th, which was, you need to be top 5. Really close regional. I think from 2nd to 7th, which was me, was a matter of a couple points, which was 3 seconds in the last workout, really put me in 3rd kind of thing. So that was funny, same result 2 years, but we go in with different expectations and completely different outlook. And so I was like really upset that whole summer. I don't want to use the word depressed, but if I've ever been depressed, that was probably when I've been depressed in the last 31 years. And so I was just contemplating if I wanted to do CrossFit again. I just felt like I put so much into it, and I didn't know if I could do that again if it wasn't going to work out. It was just kind of frustrating. It just felt like, just was frustrated, right? So I was looking into maybe trying rowing or just like, whatever. I didn't really know. I wanted to still do something physically, but
for sure.
And
this time you're still working
a full-time job.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think that was around the time I started working at Straw House Inc., which was a really good job, and I really enjoyed it. Tech company, I was doing their books, and they were growing. So by the time I started there, when they had 6 employees, by the time I left, they had 35.
Oh wow!
So it was fun, really fun. Canada's fastest growing startup one year, we won some award, and so it was really a lot of fun. And so combining that with the stress of this, it's just like, what am I doing? And then I kind of just was able to turn it around and just was able to, start to get back into training, was enjoying training, and set my sights on some off-season events, which kind of reinvigorated things. Spoke with my old volleyball coach about some mental stuff, and I've probably said this a few times, but no one watching this has probably heard me say it, so I'll say it again. And I remember going to him saying, all right, kind of back in it now, feeling good, I want to go into this competition with no doubt. that I'm like, you know, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna win no matter what. Like, I need to have that like ferocity, and you know, can you help me with that? And you know, told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And he sent me a quote from a book, and it was, you know, you have to surrender the outcome. You know, the warrior that goes into battle knowing he could die is ironically the one that's the most likely to survive. And that sort of idea of just surrendering the outcome and just being and just doing the thing as best you can, and just trusting that that's going to be, not even that that's going to be enough, but that's just going to be what it's going to be. And hearing that and reading that, like immediately, like felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I felt so much more relaxed, and like, yeah, that's kind of what I needed to hear, and that made sense to me. I think I was trying to be like one of those, you know, like a boxer that's just like, I'll never lose, like no one will ever knock me out, I'm undefeated, I'll always be undefeated, that kind of mentality, and it just doesn't, that works for some people, it doesn't work for me. And so then when I heard that, it just kind of allowed me to, you know, surrender the outcome and just focus on getting better and focus on performing. And then sure enough, I really was all about that leading up to the 2016 regionals, and had a great competition, probably still my best ever competition, and won that event. And then, you know, 2 months later made the games and came fourth. So, and then since then, I've more or less stayed at the top, still a couple little dips. And it's funny, you know, usually for me, the battle, now that there's more pressure, and you know, I don't have my accounting job anymore, I just compete, and so my money comes from either prize money and sponsorships. There's more pressure, and you know, I was talking to a different volleyball coach, but he said, yeah, money can make everything a little less fun. And that's definitely the case. It's like this constant battle of like taking it very seriously, but understanding that kind of the less seriously I take it, and the more I just enjoy it, actually the better I do, the better chance I have of, you know, doing well and making more money, and you know, continuing the ride. And you know, I've made, it's frustrating, but I've made the slip up of putting too much pressure on myself. You know, I even did it this year at the games in 2022, where leading up to the event, I was putting a lot of pressure on the end result, and you know, it was to my detriment. Among other things, I wasn't fit enough, but definitely mentally, that was part of the problem. Was I just wasn't surrendering the outcome, wasn't enjoying it. And so leading up to the event was just kind of holding just like a lot of stress, a lot of tension, and then that all bubbled over at the games when I was just kind of burnt out in a way, you know, physically, mentally, whatever, they're both. And then, you know, and then I also wasn't preparing for adversity, right? So when you're preparing, you know, when you're preparing for adversity, when you're preparing for things to go wrong, then at least if things go wrong, you're ready for it. If things go right, it's really easy to be mentally tough when you're winning. Like, it's super easy when you've got a 30-point lead to do everything right. You know, whether that be in football or CrossFit. But in this case, you know, I had not a great first day, not a great second day, and usually by that point I'm in the mix for a podium spot after day one or day two, and I was well away from that, and it was kind of like, this is unfamiliar, and I wasn't really preparing for that. I was preparing for success, not preparing for adversity, and it's a lot easier to prepare for adversity and then experience success, and be like, oh, well, this is easy, this is fun. I was expecting to have to deal with a bunch of crap. I was expecting to have bad judging calls. I was expecting to have a slow start. I was expecting to have bad events, or, you know, in the case of football, like, you know, you're not expecting to fumble, but, you know, you need to be ready that, hey, if I miss 2 catches, like, how am I going to deal with that on the third opportunity? Like, is that going to get to my head? Is that going to get to my head and my team's head if we're down by 20 at half? Like, it's easy to be up by 20 at half. Like, everyone knows what to do there. You freaking go in and holler and give them high fives, like, let's kick these guys' ass. And they suck. It's like, yeah, that's easy. Like, everyone kind of can just slip into that. What's hard is, you know, you're up by 10, and then all of a sudden, just before halftime, they score 3 touchdowns, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're down by 11. It's like, you know, can you deal with that as a team, as an individual? And it's the same in CrossFit. So if you're kind of setting contingency plans and setting strategies in place with a coach on what you're going to do if those things happen, you're not planning for it, but knowing what to do, all of a sudden, you know, when things go well, it's pretty easy.
For sure. So one thing that I really picked up a lot from you, especially just looking through your content with the Professor Project, is you talking about visualizing. And especially, I can't remember when you said you started doing it, but you talked about how some of the first times you started visualizing, it was almost like your brain would automatically be in a situation, it would go to like failure when you first started, right? How did you get out of that? And what has your, if you're still doing it, what has your visualization practice kind of evolved into as you've progressed over the years? And as part of it, like, I'm sure you've heard the Michael Phelps thing where he would visualize like his dog was flying off like everything, and then there was that one race where they flew off, and he's ready. Yes, he was ready for it. So
Yeah.
Is that something you do, or?
Yeah, admittedly, my visualization practice is not as strong as it used to be. It's not something, I guess I could blame it on the fact that I have a new kid. But, usually for me, part of it too is it's tough because, you don't know the workouts. So it's hard to visualize, something you don't know what you're going to do yet.
Yeah.
I do watch a lot of footage. So I watch a lot of footage of myself training and competing to analyze what's going wrong and what I need to change. And
so what does that look like in terms of like a daily practice? Like you rewatch your workout from every day?
Yeah, I mean, so I have my just my phone, and I'm just constantly filming. Pretty much every rep I do in this gym is being filmed.
Okay.
Like pretty much every rep, and then I'm watching it immediately after that rep or that evening. I'm going through and watching that, and just sometimes I'm writing down splits of how long will those 20 burpees take me.
Yeah.
And then recording those in my notes, but also just the more you do it, and even just the act of writing it down, you start to notice patterns, right? Like, oh, that's slow. That's a slow pace for 20 burpees. I just know that because every time I do burpees, I'm writing it down, and you just start to recognize these trends. So that practice for me, that's what it looks like. Just constantly filming myself in here because I don't have a coach with eyes on me, and even in my experience, like I've had really good coaches both online and in person, but it has to come from you. I think that's something I've learned, and I've talked to other athletes about this. I had a friend who went and played pro in Europe and volleyball, and he was saying, he's had really good coaches, and it was him watching film, and he finally noticed he had this habit of, he's standing here as a middle blocker. Your job is to stand like this, be ready, and then either go left or go right, and help that person and put up the block, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just him like watching this footage, watching himself, and then finally after days, weeks, whatever, he was noticing he was kind of, instead of just being here and pushing, he would kind of do this little this kind of little up down hesitation thing. He's like, man, I'm losing like half a second. And once and then he went to the gym, just like just a gym like this without even a net, and just practiced doing this.
Interesting.
All of a sudden, he was just getting more blocks. He's like, and this is, he's 20 something at this age. He's been playing volleyball at a high level, like Team Alberta, like high level, and then getting paid to play for a year or two already.
Yeah.
How has no one told me this? How have I not seen this? And he found that out. He's had some of the best coaches that there are, right? And so it's the same with me. I've had great coaches, but most of the breakthroughs and technical breakthroughs have come from me. No one's ever going to care as much as you do, right, about your own performance. Like as much as you can have the best coach in the world, they can be paid to coach you, you can pay them, whatever it is. It's like you're the one that's up at night thinking about, your own performance, right? You're the one that's thinking about it at breakfast, you're thinking about it at nighttime, you're thinking about it at lunchtime. Like I'm thinking about it all the time, and so I can't. You can't be waiting for someone else to find those things. And so kind of circling back to visualization, I guess what I would recommend for most people is just, if you're looking to get into it, I'd say most people haven't done or don't do visualization practice. So if you're looking to get into that, I would say the simplest thing to do is, start with something simple, right? Visualize either first person or third person, whether that's watching yourself from a distance or in your own eyes, completing a lift, but back to the thought of visualization, which is where this all started. And that was, I think it's like anything, it's just practice. So, pick something, if you want to give it a shot, pick something simple like a burpee or whatever sport you're playing, and just visualize yourself doing the thing. Especially, first start with something you're really good at. That you always do well, and then start with that, and then just progress to things that you're actually trying to improve. And it's interesting because if you have trouble visualizing yourself succeeding, there's also a potential there's an opportunity there for growth, right? If you always visualize yourself failing a lift, or you always visualize yourself, tripping when you fall off the blocks. It's like, oh, there's something subconsciously there that's kind of maybe holding you back. But interestingly, it's kind of, I realize it's a little bit counterintuitive because I was saying like plan for failure, but I think you need to have like contingencies. Okay, what am I going to do if I get no rep? Right? In CrossFit, that's when a judge is you're doing whatever burpees, and the judge says that one didn't count. Your chest didn't hit the floor. Some athletes will go, what? What do you mean, dude? It's like, don't do that. Just go hit the floor, like, hit the deck, man. Like that's wasted time. You're never getting that back, and it's the same in any sport. If the ref gives you a bad call, it's like, well, how are you going to deal with that? You're going to keep playing, or you're going to get emotional about it. What kind of athlete do you want to be? And all those things are your choice. Yeah. So I think with visualization, it's like anything, it's just practice. There's not any real crazy hacks I've found that have made it easier. It's just work, and it just takes time. And admittedly, like I said, it's not something that I've prioritized as much, at least not the individual movements, because that work is sort of being done like in the gym, during the session, immediately after the session. I'm just always thinking like technically about those things, so the visualization, it's not as much a priority.
Yeah. So when you were doing it and when it was a priority, what did it look like in terms of like duration, and would you focus on one? So you said you would start with the things that people would put out, which I think is really good, and then when you started to really get into it, would you focus on one specific thing? Because that's kind of what I've came to, where it's like I'll focus on like this one area. It's like, like catching with my left hand over, like sometimes that's a little uncomfortable. So it's like just doing that over and over again. How did it look like when you were in your prime of that?
Yeah, I would say when I was doing it the most, definitely leading up to a competition, as soon as I knew the events, I would definitely be doing it then. So in CrossFit, sometimes you get an hour and then you have to do a workout. Sometimes you get, I think the most I've ever gotten is 2.5 weeks. And so if you get a workout 2.5 weeks before you have to do it, you can visualize yourself doing the entire workout. I'll do the whole workout in my head and time it, see how close I can get to like the projected time. I used to do that. So with swimming, like I used to do that, and I'd do within a couple seconds of my time, which those are only 1 minute to 2 minute races. But you know how many strokes it takes you to get to the wall. So you just 1, 2, and then you get to 10 or 12. It's touch and flip. Whereas with CrossFit, the workouts are usually longer, right? Anywhere from 1 minute, but maybe 15 is usually kind of common. So if there's an event, it's like, okay, you're going to do 10 thrusters, and like what are the cues you're going to be focusing on? You're going to think about like keeping tension in your core, or really locking out, pushing your head through, or whatever that is. And you're going to do 10, and then you're going to drop the bar, and you're going to take 2 deep breaths, and then you're going to pick it up. And you're going to maybe you have to roll it forward, like that's part of the event, right? Is rolling it forward to the next marker, and then you're going to jump over it, or you're going to step over it, and then you're going to go to the rig, and you're going to perform chest to bar pulls. It's like, well, are you going to turn left? Are you going to turn right? Are you going to chalk? Where's the chalk? So you're kind of like going through all those little details, and so ideally, if you have enough time, especially 2.5 weeks, you're able to visualize those things, and then when you get out there, I call it choreography. So it's like a dance, right? If you're in a dance troupe or something, and you have to perform a dance on stage, it's like that. It's just painful. I call it painful choreography. And that's what CrossFit is, right? Because there's no offense, defense, there's very little reacting other than to what a judge might say. Or again, if something goes wrong, like a dumbbell like explodes, or something kind of extreme, but things that I've never seen happen.
Yeah.
Usually more or less it's just go, and you're just in your lane, and you do your reps, and everyone else is doing their thing, whether they're ahead or behind you, like it really doesn't matter. And you're performing this painful choreography. And so for me, I'm trying to, perform exactly the moves in the exact order, the exact amount of time that I've planned out. And especially in the case of regionals back in the day, these events, like I said, maybe 2.5, maybe a week and a half, sometimes maybe a little longer. And so you'd have an opportunity to practice these events. And so I would practice them at the gym. I'd set them up as close as possible with the transitions and the bar heights and the weights, and everything was the exact same. And then you can time yourself, and you compare it to another event that just finished. You're looking at your footage, and you're looking at theirs, and then you're visualizing yourself doing it over and over again, changing something you did wrong. And then so it's like you can only do the actual event maybe once, maybe twice before the event if you're lucky, usually 0 times. And so the opportunity to sit there and go through it in your head and practice those things And when I'm doing that, I'm thinking about everything that's going right? I'm practicing it exactly how I'm intending. I'm not envisioning something extreme. Like I'm not like, oh, you'll go unbroken for sure. Oh, you'll set a world record by 5 minutes. Like no, I'm going to visualize what I think is going to happen. And so in some cases, there'd be an event that I knew wasn't going to go particularly well for me, relative to the field. And so I would visualize like, hey Brent, there's going to be athletes, at this point in the workout, they're going to be leaving the rig and you're going to be coming to the rig. Like they'll be, kind of skunking you or whatever if you're talking crib. And so, you're going to be hearing them or kind of seeing them in your peripherals. You might even hear the crowd cheer as they leave the rig. That's usually what happens is athletes move forward, there's like an eruption. And they're not going to be cheering for you, and that's frustrating. So it's like, and you need to have these affirmations like, don't worry about it, Brent, you're not racing them. You're racing the clock, right? You're racing some guy in the heat before you who set a time that's going to be within seconds of your time, and you're trying to beat him to get 5 more points. Because those 5 more points might mean everything at the end of the weekend. So it's like all those, it's just like in any sport, like the little details can potentially add up. And so in CrossFit, it's like more like golf where you have each hole, like every stroke matters. Even if you're having a really good hole or a really bad hole, it's like every stroke matters because they all add up at the end. And so, you kind of visualize that where it's like, hey, it's, something miraculous isn't going to happen. I'm not all of a sudden going to be in the lead in this workout where, I'm not particularly good at like heavy front squats and strict handstand push-ups. So if it's that, someone's going to be blowing by me. So just kind of know that you're not going to be in this like epic race to the finish for first place. Like, that's not going to happen. So how are you going to deal with it when you're just kind of in the pack, near the end of the pack? And so I'll visualize that and visualize myself just like grinding and pushing really hard and still sprinting to the finish, even though I'm not racing anyone, because I might be racing someone in, there's 4 or 5 heats of 10 men, so there's someone else who's jogging to the finish. I'm going to sprint in my heat, and I'm going to take those 5 points away from that guy, because I want those points. So that's kind of like what my visualization process looks like, and I suppose actually while I say this, I still do these things. It's just not as like, so in Dubai, they'd announce an event and you only have 24 hours, and so I just start typing and writing. So I'd be writing all this stuff out, writing down how long I think things are going to take and how I'm going to split things up, and so I'm still writing all this stuff down, and I'm not like lying there, and visualizing the whole thing, but I have a set plan, and so it's like close enough.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that 2015 kind of being that low, like,
Yep.
and you said you turned it around, what, if you could pin to this, what was the exact moment, or was there something, some sort of empowering meaning you took from things, like what was the exact shift that got you to turn it around? Because I guarantee there's a lot of people, and like myself, that are going through something like that or have gone through something like that, right? And I think it's kind of interesting just to think about what was that moment, because there was a moment, right?
Yeah, it's probably never going to be as dramatic as something you'd see in a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
But I would say, the biggest one was definitely what the coach said, which was like surrender the outcome. But at that point, I was already back on track.
Yeah.
I was training, and I was excited to compete. It was just like, all right, now that I'm feeling like I'm going to do this again, like what's the plan? And then he just kind of put the cherry on top. So the thing that got me back into the headspace of like, all right, I'm going to keep doing this. After like considering quitting, I'd say there's probably 2 things. The one was just getting back in the gym. Just getting back in the gym, getting my coach to give me a program that I felt accountable to, and just enjoying it, right? So if you're dealing with this as a sport and someone's going through a rough patch, it's like just go do the sport, right? Like find the love of it again. Just go and practice, go and play a game, go and play a pickup game, go to the gym, have something you're like kind of accountable to. And so for me, that was a coach like, hey, give me some programming this week. It doesn't have to be, I don't want it to be anything too crazy, like easing back into it, but I want something that I feel accountable to that is progressing me towards the goal.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot, just feeling like, attached to that. But then the other thing was, oh man, I had another really good one. Hold on. It was, accountable to the goal, releasing the outcome. Oh yeah, regrets. So it was kind of this question of, hey, in is this little setback, are you going to let this be the end? And so in 5-10 years from now, you look back on this, are you going to regret, what would you regret more? Quitting or sticking to it? I think that was basically what it is. And that's even come up now, thinking about now, like, oh, I'm getting older, I'm 31, like, am I going to keep competing? Should I, like, switch gears and, pursue business a little more, accounting? What should I do? Like, and then I'm like, well, I think you'd regret, I don't think you'd look back and regret and say, hey man, you kept at it and you just kind of sucked. Like, I wouldn't regret that. It's like, hey, you know what? I gave it a good shot, and from 31 to 35, you just kind of sucked. You just didn't have it anymore. But you gave it a good crack. Like, I wouldn't regret that. Whereas conversely, if I was just like, you know what? I think my best days are behind me. I'm good. I might look back a couple years from now, like, I think I had a few more years in me. So it was that sort of like, if I could talk to my future self, and that future self gave me advice, they'd be like, Brent, it's not the end of the world. It's a setback, right? And you hear that all the time. You hear it in sports. You hear it, listen to musicians or actors or on podcasts, and they'll say, yeah, like I had this job at this great show, this TV show, and it's going to pay me a lot of money, and then it got canceled before the first episode aired, and I was devastated. And, I was like, oh my gosh, and then I got an offer for this other TV show, and sure enough, it was Seinfeld. It's something huge, right? Turns out that was, at the time, it seemed like the end of the world. But in the grand story, the book of your life, it was just the end of the chapter. That was the cliffhanger for the setup for the actual. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And that's I think we can tend to look at the most famous athletes, whether that's like a Michael Jordan or something, and just see success. But it's like, no, along the way there were trials and tribulations, right? It was like losing to the Detroit Pistons for whatever 2 or 3 seasons and having to overcome them. Losing to the Orlando Magic and then rebuilding, all those things. It's not like there's never been a success story that just looks like this, right? It's always this, always. And sometimes there's plateaus and there's peaks and there's valleys and usually it's not just this and then I'm done and then retire. It's like this and then it's down and it's up and then so eventually it ends if you're looking at an athletic career. But and you don't know what all those, it's just like the stock market, you don't know what the peaks and the troughs are until they're already done, right? It's easy to look back on the last 10 years of the stock market and be like, oh, you should have sold then. Yeah, you should have bought then, but it's the same, and so I think if you're dealing with athletes or you're in business, it's like, I think it's kind of that same thing where I think you're always better off giving it a crack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked about it earlier before we came in here. And, I told you that, and a lot of people that are listening to this, yes, this is the guy I've been talking about. That's the most detailed person I've ever seen in my life. You probably can already tell from a lot of things he said. But, what you said before really, really hit me. And I think it's really good to talk about people being themselves. And I also wanted to ask you, and you kind of already answered it, but say it again, where does this, for everyone who doesn't know, Brent is known as the professor. So you can already tell by the nickname how he operates in his day-to-day life, but where does that come from? And how is it, obviously you probably attribute it to a lot of your success that you've had, but how has it led to your success? And really, the biggest thing that I think about is how are you able to maintain it through all these years, right? Such an obsessive approach to what you do.
It's good. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's something that I feel like I've learned more about myself in that way in the last maybe 2 years than I have before. And so I've known Nolan for quite a while now and had done a little bit of mentoring too, kind of in a way. And because I see a lot of myself in Nolan. And so my nickname is the professor, and that's because I'm just very analytical, and I became an accountant because I think it just suited me, right? But even in so I was talking to my parents. I'm raising my first girl. She's only 8 months old, and so I was talking to my parents about what was I like when I was a kid? Just trying to figure it out, right? They said, oh, they said you would, if you were tired, this by the time I was 2 years old, they'd be like, I'm tired, and I'd just walk to my room and go to bed, just put myself to bed. Or I loved action figures, and I would like take the action figure out of the bubble casing, play with it, and I'd like put it back in so I didn't lose any of the pieces. And that was just those weren't things that were taught. That was just kind of how I was. And my dad's kind of like that too. He's quite particular. And so I think throughout CrossFit, like I've always, right away in CrossFit, I was like, oh, you can do 20 burpees a minute, and if you're going fast, you can do 15 muscle-ups a minute if you take one break or a 6-second break, or I was always doing that math. That's why they gave me that nickname within the first couple months of doing CrossFit in Australia before it was like my big thing. And so throughout the years, I think sometimes I went away from that, and maybe I've had a coach or a sports psychologist or something, or I read an article and I was trying to be someone else. I was trying to implement mental strategies like, oh, you can win no matter what, and you're this beast, or maybe trying to, step away from that analytical side of myself and go to a more like instinctual, where it's like I'm just gonna go out there and feel it out and just be an animal. That type of kind of more like maybe like a fighter mentality, like a stereotypical one, I guess. And that just didn't work for me, right? It was not that it was a mistake to try, but it didn't work for me. And then when I just settled in, I'm like, Brent, you're you, like you are you, and don't let someone else tell you how to be you. Like when you're the most you've done the best, and there's like data, there's results and medals to show that, and podium finishes to show that, and you're the most comfortable. So just lean into it, like don't stifle some nerdy impulse because, just because you feel like you should, or someone, you read something that says that's too thorough. Because there's just so many ways to do it, right? I think that's probably circling this all around, I wouldn't tell every CrossFitter that I work, let's say I was a coach, I would not try to get every CrossFitter to approach it the same way as me. Because for some people it would not work, just not work. I would tell them all these like minute details like, Brent, you're crazy. Like this doesn't make sense to me, why do I want to do this? For some it would. And so for example, I think if you look at world champions or Olympic champions or NBA champions or MVPs of the NBA or MVPs of NFL, you're going to get a lot of different personality types. Some of them are going to be like Allen Iverson. He was himself, and he was an easygoing guy, and he liked to party. He even said in an interview, he's like, I was not Kobe Bryant. Like sometimes I wouldn't show up to practice, and there's obviously the famous quote, but he's like because I was tired and I just didn't want to go. And that's just him, right? And that was unapologetically him, and it worked for him, and he was very successful. And you're Kobe, and I'm not saying I'm anything like Kobe, but he was like just relentless, and he was more relentless than his teammates, but some of his teammates were also really successful too. So Michael Phelps can still remember all his splits, right? And so I think I would have people come to me, maybe trying to tell me to be more like, I don't know, some other athlete that maybe they felt was better than me. And I think sometimes in a sport as young as CrossFit, maybe there's a worshipping of a Matt Fraser or Tia Claire Toomey or Rich Froning, because they've had the most success. So people might try to emulate them. I'm like, well, maybe I'm going to emulate Tim Duncan, right? Or, like I said, Michael Phelps, right? Maybe that's more what works for me. But then there's going to be people on a totally different end of the spectrum, and you need to find a mental strategy, competition strategy, even a programming strategy, a coaching strategy that mends well with you, because the best coach in the world for you might not be the best coach in the world for me. And so for me, being the professor, that super analytical approach, it does the opposite of burning me out, right? It makes, so I just don't stifle, if I think of something, I'm on the bike and I'm, whatever, doing my intervals, and then I finish and I go, I don't know, I'll bring up, now I bring my measuring tape to competitions now. So I'm just people think I'm a nerd or a loser, I don't care, I'm bringing my measuring tape. So I have my measuring tape and I'm just measuring stuff. Going to the rig, measuring how high the pull-up bar is, measuring how high my jump rope is, measuring the box of the handstand push-ups, and I go to my notes and I have measurements from this gym so I compare. I know how thick the handles are on my farmer's carries, all these stupid things. But I'm I just like it. It's just, and it doesn't stress me out. I think some people are well, what if it's different? I'm well, no, then I know how different it is. I know it's 1 inch different than what I'm used to. And and then I can make a decision on how to adapt to that, and then I just do it. And it takes that stress out of it. Then like, that looks different than at home.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I'm thinking about that, and that's what stresses me out, is like the unknown. Once I know and I have a plan, then I can be free to be myself. And that's usually at competitions. Like, there's an irony for me that usually the competitions, if someone's watching that's like watched a lot of footage of me, usually the situations where I look like I'm having the most fun, or maybe I'll like, you know, have some cheeky whatever, like celebration at the finish line or something. Those things are usually happening when I've done like the most ridiculous, thorough preparation for that event or that competition. So then I'm just free, I'm not stressed. It's like, oh, I've got someone's handling my food, I've got all my food weighed, you know, I'm tracking my sleep, I know exactly the diameter of all the pull-up bars, like I know exactly how I'm gonna break this workout out. I'm gonna do sets of 3 with 5 seconds rest. You know, I'm gonna transition slow, then I'm gonna transition fast in the last round. Like all these things, I've got it all planned.
Yeah.
And then I just feel free. It's this choreography that's been, the whole weekend is just planned out for me. And I just get to go and kind of like dance my way through it, as opposed to, you know, if I didn't have all those things, and so the stress sometimes and the fanaticism sometimes comes a little bit before, where I'm getting all those things dialed in. I've got a huge to-do list before I go to Miami, let's say. Like, oh, I gotta plan this, I gotta find time for this. Oh, how far is the ride? Okay, how far is the, you know, are there lots of Ubers? Whatever it is. Then once that stuff's all done, I'm just free to be myself.
Yeah.
So I think like, and not everyone's like me, and like you're like me, more than most people I've met. But if you're not like me, it's like just be yourself, and don't. If someone like me is trying to get you to be like me, don't listen to them, because you're just not, right. It's like you're not that people can't change, but you know, if me talking about all those little things makes your head spin, it doesn't excite you. Like spreadsheets excite me, right? Like that, you know, got spreadsheets on all my Zone 2 work, right? And I'm like tracking changes because I just enjoy it. Like that brings me joy. But if that's like, well, that sounds like too much work, then it's like maybe you need a coach that balances that out, or someone's doing a little bit of that work for you to make sure things are happening behind the scenes, but you don't even know the details, right? Yeah. Because some of those details, someone needs to be tracking them, but I don't know. Hopefully that kind of answers the question. But I think it's just like, yeah, just don't be afraid to be yourself, right? And don't let people try to like push you in a direction that like doesn't like resonate with your inner like voice, if that makes sense. And I think because that's just like grinding. There's already enough struggle in your life and in sports that you're just like trying to push yourself a square peg into a round hole. Whether that's like a mindset or something like that. And it's just not gonna work.
Yeah, that's an incredible answer. I totally agree with that too. And like you're saying, I believe, yeah, everyone can change, but when it comes to their like true nature within them, right? There's certain things, like you're saying, that people gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And that's really like one of my passions in life is like, well, what's life on your terms? You know, like what do you really want, and you like what wakes you up in the morning? You know, finding something that really drives you, like spreadsheets for you,
yeah.
right?
Because seriously, you know, different people, it's going to be totally different things, and then there's some people that literally they just want to lie in bed and watch TV. You know, like I could do that for like a day, and then I'd just go crazy. But if that's you, then I mean, you still get out of bed, but but you know, it's just different, right? Yeah, you have to find kind of like what makes you click, and you know, they say, what do they say? You know, find something you love and you never work a day in your life. It's not really true. But I mean, I'm doing like what I love, but it's definitely still work, and it's definitely still hard. But it's a lot easier than if I was, you know, there's definitely certain jobs that would just not suit my personality. I just couldn't put up with them. Like I couldn't serve coffee all day because I just don't like working with the general public that much. I just couldn't do it. No way, zero chance. I've done it, and it's just so exhausting for me. Whereas some people are
feed them.
They love it. They love bringing a smile to people's face. They love giving people food, and you know, whether that's coffee or you know whatever, being a cook or something like that. It's like some people that's gonna work great. For me, it would just drive me crazy. But I could totally just sit in a room and just work on spreadsheets, which would drive those people, you know, themselves. So,
yeah. No, I think that's really good stuff. Even too, like the reason we're doing this, it's like maybe there is someone that's in their bed right now that really, in their nature, is to be like this, but they haven't had an environment to cultivate that up to this point too, right? I'll have a few more questions here, and then I'll let you get to your training session.
No worries. I got time.
what would you say to 2014 Brent before you start this whole big journey down all this? What advice would you have for him?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably maybe not the answer that I think I wouldn't tell him anything because everything's been fine. You know what I mean? Like I think that's. I remember I heard someone get asked this question on a different podcast, and that was their answer. It's like I really like that because everything that's happened, it's all led me to here, and I'm doing good. I think when I look back on the last 10 years of competing in CrossFit, I think there's kind of like different levels of, if you want to call the word regrets, and that might be what you try to like fix, right? I think on the one hand, there's little things in competition. It's like, rest a little longer before you started that handstand walk in 2018. Or, because that could have been, instead of fourth, you might have come second in the world if you just rested longer. Or, make sure you lock out that left elbow in Dubai, or whatever it is, right? Like these little, stupid little things in a competition, I'm sure just, like in football, you're like, oh, I should have turned left instead of right, and I would have caught the ball, right? But I don't really regret any of those things. I think if anything, what I would look back on and the advice that I'm giving some young athletes is just it's kind of exhausting, but you just have to take extreme accountability of everything. Just everything that happens to you is because of you. It's either your fault or it's because of you. Don't wait on a manager, don't wait on a coach, don't wait on your parents, don't wait on a DM, don't wait on an email. Like it's all you, right? So if you want to get better, if you want to make more money, if you want to get a different job, whatever it is, it's like you can't wait for anyone because no one else cares about you as much as you do. Not even close. You could have, and I've had great coaches and I have a great coach, but it's like, and it's just exhausting to have to be like, oh man, I have to do the work. Like I have to go to the gym and train, but I also have to learn about energy systems and I also have to learn about like better technique. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if someone else worried about those things for you? It's like, yeah, it would, but unless you have like an extreme amount of money to pay like a super professional, but guess what? Like all those professionals are busy. The best in the world are busy, or they're really expensive, and like, so you need to pay them a lot of money to get their attention, to get their help, and make them care. So I think like, if I was to give myself advice in 2014, it would just be, like trust your instincts, like be yourself, and just take like extreme ownership, even more than I was taking back then. Sometimes I would kind of try to pass some things off because I'm like, oh, I got so much on my plate. I need to find someone who can do this and help me with this, and yeah, I should have just kept it. It's a lot of work. Or never dish off the things that are like the key moving pieces to your goal, right? So maybe there's things like, oh, I guess I could get someone to do my laundry or something, because it's like that's not really something that's really moving the dial on where I want to be. But the big moving pieces of your big picture goals, like you need to be very in touch with those. So whether that's, if you're a swimmer, it's like, like technique videos and, like nutrition and just like learning about all that stuff that's going to move the needle and make you swim faster. And with CrossFit, it's like energy systems, programming, making, like for me, it's making spreadsheets like, how many times a week should I be doing handstand walks? What's the answer to that? Like, I don't know. Like every day? Could do it every day. It's not really that like demanding, but that seems like a lot. So just figuring out, like answering that question.